Hi Dayton, Jared here. I want to thank you so much for welcoming me to Lincoln High School this morning. It was a pleasure to be back at the school, to see some of my former students, and to see you in action this morning. And so I want to begin just by letting you know that I think you had a really outstanding lesson. I think there are a ton of positive things happening in Miss Ortmeyer's class with your assistants. And I mean it when I say it. You have a great mentor in her. She knows what she's doing. She understands students. Students connect with her. And while her style is going to be different than yours in some ways, I think you can learn a lot from both of the experiences that you're having at Lincoln. So we didn't really get a chance to chat a whole lot after your lesson, but I wanted to provide you with some feedback, and I don't want you to be overwhelmed by it. I want to begin by assuring you that your lesson was good. It was quality instruction. Students were participating, and for the most part engaged. You had assessments of their understanding in the form of the entrance ticket, the writing that you had them do, the activity that you had them participate in, as well as the exit ticket on their way out. So hopefully that exit ticket, as you look at those, indicates to you what students know and what they don't know moving forward. So I'm going to throw out just a lot of things that I noticed. I don't want you to necessarily think this is a judgment or that I'm trying to be negative in any way. These are just things that I noticed during your lesson that I want to just ask questions. I want to raise questions about that you can kind of wrestle with in your own mind. Some of these you might want to consider in your weekly reflection, or as you consider your planning for the next lesson that I might observe. But overall, you did a nice job. And I also recognize that you're in a classroom that's not necessarily your own. You don't have complete freedom. You're following Miss Ortmeyer's plans or Mr. Morrison's plans to an extent. But that being said, a couple of things that I just want to point out. You can read through all of this on your own. I'll include it in the email. I did not assess your notebook today. I took a look through it. I didn't really see anything for tabs 1, 2, or 3. You had a couple of co-teaching lesson plans filled out. We really probably need to start rolling with that. You know, you've been at Lincoln about a month now, and if you don't make progress each time, this is a beast that's going to end up haunting you come May. So the next 3 times that I'm at Lincoln, I'm going to need to see some progress on that notebook. So just be aware of that. And if you have some downtime in the upcoming weeks or days, you might want to begin assembling some of those. Maybe you have some of those pieces. Just make sure that they get into the notebook as well. When Ms. Ortmeyer began class this morning, I originally thought maybe this isn't the best use of time. I mean, as she kind of wandered through the aisles and stamped the students' homework. But as I watched and observed what she was doing, I thought it was really actually quite a good idea. She was connecting with each student individually as she went around. She was bringing up things from their life. She was joking with them. She was asking them questions. This is something you would be able to do at the door as students enter the classroom as well. But I thought, wow, what a great way, while you're kind of spending class time checking homework, what a great way to kind of welcome and encourage students into your classroom at the same time. Following that, there was a bell ringer. And so I've got some times here. You know, she took about 2 minutes going around the classroom. At about 4:30, the bell ringer was displayed. And so the question that I have in orange here is, would it be possible to do both of those things at the same time? To have students put their homework on one side of the desk and have their bell ringer going on at the same time, just so that students aren't waiting while she goes around to all 29 students and has just a one-on-one conversation with each of them. So those are the types of questions that I'm going to pose. I'm going to try to give you a breakdown of some of the time, just because I've got a clock running, just so you know kind of where you land in the time of the class. And then the questions I pose in orange. And again, these are not non-judgmental. These are just things that you might want to consider as you move forward. So the next thing that I observed is, who are we going to call on? Let's go with Anna. And I think that was a quote from you. And so my questions are just, why her? Do you have a rational process for choosing and selecting which students speak in front of the classroom? Is it random? Are you marking them off each day as you choose each student? How are you ensuring, I guess, the question would be, how are you ensuring that every student has a voice? That all 29 of these students have an opportunity to speak? Or is it convenient to just sort of look around and see, that person's kind of paying attention, or they're not, and I'm going to call on them? There are some things that are unique about your situation. I'll talk about the content later, but the fact you have 29 students in that tiny classroom is a unique situation. And so if you're calling on one student at a time to answer a question, that means you have 28 students that may or may not be engaging with the question that you're asking. So I'd encourage you to think about the process, the ways that you can ensure you're being equal in the way that you're allowing students to respond to those questions. I marked this several times, but I love the humor in the classroom. I love the way that you're building on Ortmeyer's sense of humor. I love just the little sly comments that she has. The game, this was Kahoot back in my day. Some of the examples that she used. It really helped to establish a culture. I feel like after 40 minutes in your classroom, I have a sense of the culture and the connection students have with the teacher in that classroom. So keep that up and find ways that you can kind of experiment with that in your own sense of humor, in your own personal way. The activity was great. I really liked it. I thought it was engaging. Students, it was hands-on. One thing I noticed is that the group of students in the back, there's a table where there's 3 students kind of to the right of the door as you come in. They didn't have any paper. So everybody else was holding up green, they were holding up pink, they were holding up whatever, but they weren't participating. So again, great activity, but we need to ensure that all 29 of our students are actively engaged in what we're doing. Maybe we just didn't have enough paper, maybe it was just something that you overlooked, but they didn't necessarily ask for it. I noticed that. The other thing is that I noticed as you went up to the board, there was kind of this transition where it was between Miss Ortmeyer and you, and students weren't really sure what to do. They were kind of getting paper. That took about 4 minutes to get all the paper out. And then when you came up, you took another minute with your back to the students writing the philosophers' names and the colors. And so right there, 5 minutes, I wonder if there's a smoother way to kind of transition from that opening sort of question to the activity phase of the lesson. And some of that will come with time as you experiment and write more lessons and get more comfortable with this. There also just seemed to be a little bit of confusion as far as how that game was played and then how exactly they were supposed to hand the papers forward. And so I think it's just important that you consider, as we're writing lesson plans, you're going over it and over it and over it in your mind. It makes perfect sense. Make sure you're explicit in your directions about what you're asking students to do. All right, we're going to do this game. Do you remember this game? All right, this is how the game is played. Just a 10, 15-second explanation to sort of remind students, rather than assuming when you pass out colored paper, they remember what you did the last time that you did this. And then also, if there is a particular way you want them to hand things forward, make sure you explicitly give them those directions. Don't just assume that they're going to do it the way that you want it to. And so we move into kind of your direct instruction phase. It began at about 16 minutes. Students started taking notes at about 19 minutes, and this ran for most of the rest of the period. I think it was good. There was some good content, some good aspects to the lecture or the direct instruction, but I did think it was a little long for students. I saw some of them heads kind of drooping, eyes kind of drooping a little bit. There are a couple of ways you can work to engage students even during a lecture or direct instruction phase. One is to try to connect in every way you can the content you're discussing to 21st century American teenage life. Okay, and so I highlighted a few things here, bolded them. You mentioned the right to bear arms. And then you said something along the lines of this is kind of debated today, right? Or there are 2 camps for this. while that comment, I caught what you were saying, I don't know that it resonated in any way with the students. And I thought, man, that is a great opportunity to just take a moment and even weave it into your lesson, to your design. What is the debate? Do all students know that there's a debate? Do they know the left wing and the right wing and their philosophies towards, guns? How does that connect to life in the 21st century? And then there's another point where Ortmeyer said, man, this is a good time to try this experiment. How many of you, show your hands or speak about this, how many of you think that people are naturally cruel, wicked, and greedy? And I thought, whoa, what a phenomenal question, right? One of the theorists, I forget which one, this is sort of his thesis, right? That this is how humanity is. This is we're born with this original sin or whatever. I just thought that might have been a missed opportunity to really capitalize on student interest and really draw them back into the lecture, the lesson, right? Because they're sitting there taking notes, or at least we think they're taking notes, and then all of a sudden you kind of bring them back to you, and just you've got them for another 5 minutes so they can go back to the notes. Okay, so there are those kinds of things that you could bring in. Another one was a connection you made to 9/11. You're talking about people give up their rights when they're fearful, when they're scared. I thought, man, what a great way. And you mentioned 9/11, but what another great way to expand on that and bring enlightenment thought or ideas into the 21st century where students are currently living. I think anytime you can make that connection is really powerful in the history classroom. I ask you quite a few questions about the note taking. And it's just because I don't necessarily know what the process is. Is the expectation that students are writing down every single thing that you're putting up on the board? Is the expectation that whatever they write down they can use on the quiz or use on the test? Is it that that's what they're going to use to study for the quiz or the test? And then I have some things that I'd ask you to consider. Consider using close notes, where you're providing students with those notes and you're just leaving in blanks where some of the key words are for them to fill in. I'm curious as to whether or not students have access to the PowerPoints or paper PowerPoints where they have your slides and they can jot down any extra notes they want to. I think sometimes we think, well, students need to be responsible, and one way that they're going to be engaged is by taking down their own notes. But what I noticed was there were some students who seemed to be finished with the notes early, while other students were still writing down, even when you said, are we good? Are we ready to go on? And they didn't indicate that they were ready to go on. They were still writing, and we moved on anyways. Because, again, you have 29 students. Some are going to write at varying speeds. You might want to play around with the idea of different note-taking strategies. Do you explicitly teach a note-taking style? What are your expectations for notes? And again, these are some things you may have discussed with the class, or Miss Ortmeyer may have, but as a visitor, I'm not aware of those. And so I'm just curious what those expectations are. So those are just some things that I noticed. I did mention earlier that I think one of your challenges is the number of students you have. I think another challenge that you face is just how much content, how much good content you're responsible for covering. I mean, each of these philosophers, you could essentially have an entire unit on. And so I think it's really important to recognize, what are my goals? What are my objectives? What do the students need to know? And try to kind of focus into that. The extraneous information about the Baroque period and the clothing, while all of that is great information and it's interesting to some students, when you say things like, this isn't really important, it's not going to be on the test, you don't really need to know this, but I'm going to tell it to you anyways, that might confuse some students. You know, some students think, well, I don't know what is important and what isn't, because it's all being presented on the PowerPoint, up on the board, and all I have is this blank white sheet of paper. And so I'm not sure what to write down and what not to, and did he say that's important? Did he say that's not important? So just another thing to consider as you're moving forward, maybe trying to take those philosophers you're studying, and you must study, and going deeper with those, building connections between Enlightenment, 21st century America, rather than bringing in some of these extraneous kinds of things, such as the Baroque period, that might just kind of confuse some students in their thinking. But otherwise, I thought it was a phenomenal lesson. I look forward to getting in the classroom again. And as always, if you have questions or concerns, don't be afraid to contact me. Have a good one, Dayton.